on the wall. Who is the fairest one of them all?
Famed is thy beauty, Majesty.
Hello, and welcome to another crazy edition of, we didn't want that part, of Professor Babel, coming at you with another lesson from the ancient languages. Today, we want to talk about being perfect. Look at you. I know you're perfect. Flawless in each and every way. You're perfect. You are so perfect. Okay, let's begin. You are perfect. So was Adam and Eve. Perfect. Perfect were they in the garden. But the question is, how could perfect man, ish, perfect woman, isha, sin if they both were perfect? How could the angels have sinned if they too were perfect? I know you're perfect. You're just the greatest. You look wonderful. You look marvelous. You look excellent. But is perfect enough? This is the question. So let's look at it from a theological perspective. We look at it from the beginning. Reshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et aharetz. The Lord created the heavens and the earth, and he said it was good. He said it was good. And he made creation, and he said creation was good, and he stamped it. He approved of its value, of its intrinsic value. And he made it good. He made it perfect. Just like you, he made you perfect. The problem with perfect is usually perfection has a lack of sustainability. Let me explain. In the Hebrew, perfect now, and it's very similar in the Koine Greek. I have to look that up because it's quite fascinating. The words are for perfect and good are similar for both the Hebrew and the Greek, but the word is kalal. Kalal. Kalal in Ivrit is actually where we derive the word perfect. There's different, like I explained before, if you use lexicon, if you look at the etymology of different words, you will see that a word can have multiple meanings just on the glance. If we think about today, cool could be like, oh, Professor Babel's cool, got a little thing going on, he's cool. Or cool can mean climate, like it's cold, it's cool, weather. Same word, but we tend to equivocate on the word because a particular word has multiple meanings. In scripture, when you see words like world, for example, world can be planet, cosmos, or world could be age, this particular dispensation. So different words have different meanings, and that's why it's important to understand context when you're looking at various passages. So here we find in the beginning, in Bereshit, that God created man and woman, and they were perfect, but we're plagued with the question as to how a perfect man and a perfect woman fall. How can they eat of the tree of the garden of good and evil? How can they both fall if they were in fact perfect? And so let's look at it. Perfect now, as my brain starts to. if you think about something that's perfect, but it doesn't have permanence, for example, rose, bouquet of roses, that your loved one gives you, right? You give your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your spouse, whatever. They like the roses, right? You give them the roses. So you give them roses, and when you give them those roses, they are perfect. They've been freshly picked or cut, and you put them in a vase, and they're perfect. The roses are perfect. Or, date night, and you do the rose petals on the bed, and the PG people. The candlelit dinner, perfect. The roses are perfect today, or they're perfect that night. But the next day, they still might be okay. Then the next day, well, not as okay. And then you go a week later, and those roses start to kind of wither, kind of gets a little flaky, gets a little dried up. And unless you get really fancy and put it in the freezer or something like that and wrap it up in some cellophane or do something creative to it, that rose eventually will deteriorate. Or just like, have you ever bitten an apple that was fresh and you put it on the counter, and you came back 2 minutes later, and it's already starting to, so what are we saying? That perfect doesn't mean permanence. And so, Adam and Eve were perfect. I'll write it in English. They were perfect. So how could perfect man and perfect woman sin? How can they fall from grace? I'll tell you why. You want to know why? I'll tell you why. They could because they were perfect. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Wait a minute. You are telling me that perfect man and perfect woman sinned, fell from the Garden of Eden, fell out of God's grace because they were perfect? But they were perfect. How could they do me like that when they were perfect? The perfect spouse, the perfect mate, the perfect person for you. They knew you. They noted you. They understood you. They were perfect. But how could perfect not be perfect? And I will explain why. Because Adam and Eve, like the rest of us, are perfect. But perfect is not perfect as we know it as being without flaws, or as we know it as being sinless. Perfect, as we understand perfect throughout Scripture, means like a maturity. Means like we're complete, but not fully complete. What are you saying? What I'm saying is that we are perfect, but we are not yet perfected. Now that sounds like a bunch of crazy stuff. We are perfect, but we're not yet perfected. When this whole thing comes to an end, when God, when the world as we know it, which has already fallen apart, when this whole thing ends, and there's a new heaven and a new earth, and however position of rapture you believe, When there's a separating of the wheat and the tare, the righteous and the unrighteous, when the Lord returns, when the culmination of this entire cosmos or world as we know it comes to an end, we will no longer be perfect, but we will be perfected. Having been perfected means that now you cannot be untarnished again, because you are not just perfect. Perfect means mature or complete, but it doesn't mean a permanence of completion or maturity. It just means at that moment you're perfect. And so that's how Adam and Eve can fall, because they were perfect, but they were not yet perfected. That's why you get burnt all the time in relationships, because you're dealing with somebody that's perfect, but they're not yet perfected. In order for us to really get to a place where we experience untarnished, unblemished ills, is when we arrive to that place of perfection, where we're perfected and not just perfect. I hope that confused you a little bit more, and keep watching for more videos. Professor Babel, God bless.